Frog Days of Summer by Kathy Wiley. I stared at the speaker, a tall man in khakis and a light green polo, offering me a garishly colored drink. While he was also dark and handsome, he wasn't my type, considering he was my brother. A virgin sex on the beach? Isn't that an oxymoron? Daniel Norwood smirked at me. Who are you calling a moron? When I laughed at his joke, he continued, I know you wanted something non-alcoholic. And I thought all women like sex on the beach. No way. You get sand in places you don't want sand. I knew this would embarrass him, and I wasn't disappointed when he blushed. Jackie. He sputtered. You know I meant the drink. Well, yes, but this was more fun. I raised the mocktail to eye level, inspecting it. At least the alcoholic version did its job of making people look more attractive. But the virgin version? I took a sip. Bleck. They've replaced the vodka, the schnapps, and the creme de cassis with generic grenadine. I've had lollipops with better balance, nuance, and less red dye number 40. I glanced around at my surroundings. I guess I shouldn't expect much at a beach bar, and a temporary one at that. But you can't beat the view. Grenville Beach, our current location, and the site of the food festival I was here to judge, was a prime example of the pristine beaches and sparkling waters of the Gulf Coast of Louisiana. After flying to New Orleans the previous day, we had driven through swamps, marshes, bayous. I wasn't sure which was which, but I was fairly certain we saw them all. Mostly, we had viewed flat, sea-level Louisiana. No wonder the colorful houses here were on stilts. But the long drive had been worth it, since we were now surrounded by palm trees, tall dunes, and crashing waves. There were even dolphins jumping and playing in the surf. I sipped the terrible drink, then reached up to make certain that my hat was secure on my head. While my brother had inherited our parents' Italian skin tone, I was a throwback to my grandmother's Scandinavian roots, with blonde hair and skin that burned after 2 minutes of solar ray exposure. So, in addition to marinating myself in sunscreen, I tried to stay within the shadows as we walked between the 20 or so temporary booths. It helped, slightly, with both the sun and the blistering July temperatures. Despite the heat, I shivered as I checked out the various chefs working on station prep. One of the chefs must have noticed my discomfort at the type of meat being prepared. Hey, Chef Jackie. Look, it's the can-can. The man Richard, according to the apron wrapped around his muscular frame, set down his knife, then picked up 2 of the many limbs in front of him and started humming notes, kicking the gangly legs up in the air. Very funny, Chef. You have good rhythm, I admitted. But you've disrupted my happy fantasy that everyone was working on chicken wings and not frog legs. Richard took the legs, tucked them below his armpits, and mimicked flying. Is that better? Better. I gave him a grin as we continued winding our way through the rows. See, the bad drink is going to come in handy, Daniel said. It will numb your taste buds, so you won't actually taste the frog legs. Tasting the frog legs is the entire reason I'm here. A desperate effort to restart my career, remember. Oh, how the mighty have fallen, I thought. Although I won't be doing that tonight. That'll be tomorrow. I pointed out a raised dais with 2 tables, where another chef and I would do the judging at noon the next day. Tonight's just for loading equipment and a few hours of prep. He raised an eyebrow. Those things are little. Why do they take so long to prepare? I shook my head. Daniel, your idea of cooking involves a microwave, so everything is quick for you. Do you see a microwave anywhere? He glanced around the beachfront parking lot, now repurposed as a multi-kitchen competition area. The booths were standard-sized, aluminum frames with a canvas roof and roll-down walls, each about 12 feet by 12 feet. Most of the contestants had raised their walls, so we were able to view the majority of the cooking area. The spaces were crammed with prep tables, portable cooking equipment, and generators, the latter of which provided a steady cacophony that, sadly, drowned out the sound of the ocean. No, Daniel admitted. Definitely no microwaves. Right. The actual cooking of the froggies should be fast. But we chefs like to make it more exciting, zooze it up. Brines, marinades, dry rubs. Those take time. One of the nearby chefs nodded her approval at my statement. I seem to recall soaking them in milk, too, in culinary school, which is probably the last time I had frog legs. I mused. Do they really taste like chicken? Daniel asked, a dubious look on his face. Mostly. The texture is similar. I suppose you could say that it's fishy-tasting chicken, which tastes better than it sounds. Trust me. My reluctance for tomorrow's tasting is that I keep thinking about the poor little frogs. In general, I'm fine eating just about anything. But for some reason, I just can't get the idea of the cute little animal out of my head when I eat frog legs. I had the same problem when I ate an emu burger. It didn't help that when we drove past the swamps, I kept picturing a banjo playing Kermit the Frog, singing about rainbows and connections. That tended to dampen my appetite. If Z-frogs didn't want to be eaten, Z-frogs shouldn't be so delicious, a deep male voice said. I reluctantly turned around, recognizing the voice as Henri Clements, my fellow judge for this event. I had been trying my best to avoid him, but now he waddled my way, wearing a white toque and chef's coat that might have fit him 20 years and 40 pounds ago. I knew Henri from my days as a celebrity chef, before the alcohol ruined things. Well, before I ruined things. I had to be nice to him, since he was the reason I had secured this gig at the Grenville Beach Frog Legs Festival. It was only the second event I had attended since leaving rehab, but the less I thought of that first festival, the better. Starting over was hard. In order to recover my career, I needed to be grateful and gracious to Chef Henri, even if it was difficult. As my cousin, famed frog farmer Renee Clement, once said, "The frog is like a woman, only their thighs are good." His words were annoying enough, but they were made worse by the accompanying leer at my legs. I fought the urge to tug down my flowered sundress. As his gaze slowly moved up, I felt my brother vibrating in anger next to me. I nudged Daniel, while reminding myself just how much I needed this job. I see now why Frenchmen are known for being so romantic. Trust me, that was nicer than most of the things I was thinking. Another competitor, Brenda Sterling, laughed and gave a thumbs up. One of my first jobs had been as Brenda's sous chef, so I was glad she had my back. Henri seemed less appreciative of her sign of support. Of course, Henri said, with a disgusted look in Brenda's direction. Some women have too much in the thigh department, if you know what I mean. Brenda stiffened. I knew her weight had always been a touchy subject. When I had started working in television, she'd been happy for me, but had admitted jealousy, wondering if her appearance held her back from similar opportunities. I was instantly irritated for her. And some men have too little in other departments, if you know what I mean. Part of me regretted saying that I really did need this job, but I've never been good at keeping my mouth shut. The cooks in my kitchen had compared me to Gordon Ramsay, although much nicer, and with 95% less cursing. Henri spun on his heel and left the aisle. Daniel glared at his back as he retreated. "Thanks, Jackie. I'm glad you put that man in his place," Brenda said, bending over her cutting board. While she might not have appealed to Henri, I had always thought she was strikingly beautiful. Her dark skin was set off by her spotless chef whites, bright blue cornrows peeked out from under her yellow bandana, and her body was crazy strong from years of hard work as a chef. I wouldn't want to mess with her, especially when she had a knife in her hand, like now. She was mincing some garlic with great skill and, I suspect, some redirected anger. "I've always admired your knife skills," I said, stepping around the edge of the booth to join her. I waved at Miguel Alvarez, her sous chef. "And your knives?" I slid a large chef's knife out from a cloth knife carrier case and held it up to the light, admiring the edge. I hate to admit it, but Japanese knives really do offer precision. That entire set is custom made for me, too. For my hand, she angled the knife to show the monogram on the side, SR. I laughed as I realized that she used the initials from her restaurant, Sterling Reputation, rather than her own. I couldn't blame her. She grabbed an onion and set it on her cutting board. "Here, try it. she said, stepping back from the cutting board. I need some onions for the marinade. Minced? I asked, setting down my barely touched drink. When she nodded, I balanced the onion in one hand and the blade in the other. I barely felt any resistance as I sliced the onion in half. A few seconds more, and there was a pile of tiny onion cubes on the board. Nice. As easy as, well, a hot knife through butter. And trust me, the custom fit means it's even better for me, Brenda said, taking back the knife. But I'm still not convinced to abandon my German knives. I had to defend my own cutlery. Getting help from the judges. Are you, Brenda? Asked Richard, he of the Cank and Dance, from his nearby booth. You know, we need some type of help if we're going to beat you. Brenda set down her knife, placed her hands on her hips, and turned to me. Chef Richard Hargrove here has been the Frog Legs champion the past 3 years. Also won the Rain Frog Festival Cook-Off 5 years in a row. He shrugged. What can I say? I've been lucky. Well, I wish we could be lucky enough to get rid of Chef Henri, Brenda said, frowning down the aisle where Henri was leaning over a young female chef. That man. Someone should go rescue Kayla Phillips from Handy Henri. My brother immediately headed over 3 booths to save Kayla. He's just that type of person. Not anxious to deal with Henri again, I dawdled, even to the point of taking another sip of my drink, before following him to extricate the poor girl, or rather poor woman. I had recently turned 30, so I wasn't much older than she was. Unfortunately, I had plenty of experience dealing with handsy cooks. There's something about those heated kitchens that makes everyone hot to trot. I often had to redirect kitchen employees from lust back to lunch, from sex back to sautéing. Usually, it was peer-to-peer and consensual, but I had known some executive chefs, like Henri, who abused their power. Henri was scowling at Daniel when I arrived. Chef Henri, can I speak with you regarding our judging criteria? I just wanted to clarify a few things. While Daniel stayed with Kayla, I drew Chef Henri away, stepping onto the sandy beach. He appeared annoyed to be parted from the pretty young chef. She threw me a grateful look as she tucked her dark hair under her beanie. Henri glared at me. What could you possibly need to clarify about frog legs? Do they taste good? Fini. Alcohol hasn't killed all your taste buds, has it? I suppose he was getting me back for my size comment. It has not. I haven't had a drop in over 4 months. He peered down at the drink in my hand and raised an eyebrow. It's virgin? I realized this was a bad choice of word to use around him. Non-alcoholic. And incredibly nasty. Since Daniel was distracted, I took the opportunity to pour my drink onto some beach grass. I still have a chef's palate. I'm just not as experienced with frog legs. Then you are missing out, mademoiselle. Frog legs are so succulent, so moist and delicious. I did my best not to laugh when he actually tapped his fingers to his mouth and kissed them with a loud moi, like an effusive Frenchman in a silly cartoon. They are the epitome of French cooking, when treated properly. He sneered down the line, where some chefs were setting up a portable deep fryer. That is not treating them properly. No, but it is Cajun. I assume these are Cajun frogs. Henri rolled his eyes. Yes, but I try not to hold that against them. They are, of course, inferior to French frog legs. But since the Cajun Catch Company is sponsoring the contest, they are providing the product for all the chefs. He pointed toward a large refrigeration truck parked outside the cooking area, with Cajun Catch Company in large letters, with each C being formed by a cartoon shrimp and the J in Cajun by an alligator tail. So, who is going to give Chef Richard some competition this year? I asked Henri, gesturing at the other chefs around us. Aw, he rubbed at his chin. I suspect if he'd had a mustache, he would have started to twirl one of the ends. I believe that Chef Kayla has a good chance. She is talented. And I have to admit it, Chef Gabriel has performed well in the past years. He might also have an advantage this year, since his daughter spent time under me and probably picked up many useful techniques. Chef Leonard came in second last year with his salt and pepper frogs. He is one to watch. Chef Frederick has a very good garlic frog with herbes de Provence. although I suspect that choice was him trying to cater to my taste. He sneered. I couldn't help it. So we could say he was toading up to you? Pun intended. Chef Henri stared at me, a blank look on his face. Get it? Toad, why? Toad. Frog. Never mind. I frowned as I realized that Henri had skipped my friend. What about Chef Brenda? He waved a hand in the air, dismissively. Yes, of course. Chef Brenda caters to the local crowd with her frog legs picante. I find it too spicy, as the name suggests. Also, too many ingredients. Too complicated, much like a woman. Henry's eyes brightened as he approached another table. At first, I thought he was interested in the food, then noticed the young chef's assistant in the booth. When she noticed us, her face flushed as red as her hair. She quickly spun on her rubber clogs and headed toward the portable bathrooms. She must have been desperate to take refuge there. Henri quickly shifted his attention to the other person in the booth, an older man with a clean-shaven head and colorful tattoos covering every visible surface, including his scalp. Bonjour, Chef Gabriel. It is good to see you once again, Chef Henri, he muttered in a manner that did not suggest delight. Gabriel glanced my way, then did a double-take. Wait, Chef Jackie, right? From Dinners, Drinks, and Decadence? I nodded. That was my show. Until the Gourmet Channel canceled it last year. And I recognize you as well. I rushed to add before needing to explain why it was canceled. Chef Gabriel Zimmerman, right? Of Café Z? Your restaurant was featured in an article in my In-Flight magazine. Really? Henri said, his eyebrows raising to the level of his toque. How much did you have to pay someone for that? I could see Gabriel clenching his jaw. I didn't. They contacted me. Said they wanted to showcase the best New Orleans restaurants. He paused. Chef Henry's restaurant wasn't in that article, was it, Chef Jackie? I tried not to laugh as I shook my head. You will excuse me, Chef Henri said. I am needed elsewhere. I was relieved when Henri left, but I watched to make certain he wasn't after some other young woman. Richard seemed to be his target, so I sighed and turned my attention back to Gabriel. Well, I probably lost his vote, Gabriel said, not seeming too upset. Don't worry, I said. I'll be fair, trust me. On another note, I hope your assistant is okay. It seemed like she wanted nothing to do with Chef Henri. Gabriel's eyes darkened. No, Taylor definitely didn't. I wish I knew why. He sighed. She's my daughter. And since we wanted her to get a range of experience after culinary school, she started as a line cook for Chef Henri. I'm still not certain exactly what happened, but she quit suddenly and begged me for a job. I started her off as an esculary, to make certain no one accused me of favoritism. I smiled, knowing that esculary was a fancy word for dishwasher. She's worked hard ever since and has been rising quickly. She'll soon replace me as executive chef. He held out an arm to the returning Taylor, who tucked herself into his embrace. No one will ever replace you, Dad, but thank you. Gabriel introduced us, but Taylor's attention was distracted as she glanced around. I could tell the moment when she saw Henri. Don't like Chef Henri, huh? I asked. He's a great chef, Taylor said, obviously thinking more, but not saying it. No disagreement here, I said. But not such a great person, and that's just my experience as a fellow chef. With his ego, I bet he was a lousy boss. Taylor kept her lips firmly sealed. I shot a glance at Gabriel, hoping he'd get my signal that I'd like a minute alone with his daughter. Catching on quickly, he released her. Let me go pick up the frog legs from the truck. He ducked under a railing and jogged away. Real subtle, Dad, Taylor said to his retreating back. She turned to me. Look, I know I've got a good setup, working at my dad's place. Seems like I'd be safe enough to badmouth a former boss. But the restaurant business is small, and Chef Henri is powerful. He can make or break people. Restaurants, too. I'm not risking it just to get things off my chest. I get that, I said. I probably should take that same advice, considering how precarious my own career is. She furrowed her brow. But you're Chef Jackie. You're a star. I was a star. Now, I'm a meteor. Or wait, doesn't it become a meteorite after it falls on the ground? Or is it the opposite? I shook my head. Doesn't matter. My point is that I need to get up off the ground. I should also exercise caution. Still, I paused. That doesn't mean we let those in power get away with things. We as women are taught not to make a fuss, not to cause a scene. But that just helps those with power retain it. Taylor nodded. I totally agree, Chef Jackie. And if certain lines had been crossed, I would be telling everyone, including the police. But it was mostly insinuations, innuendos, and other things I couldn't prove. Understood. I glanced over at Henri. That's usually the way, isn't it? So they can deny they meant any harm, or say you misunderstood their intentions. When Gabriel returned, carrying a large box, I shook my head at his questioning glance. That's a lot of frog legs, I said, surprised. How many do you have to cook? We each have to make around 100 frog legs, enough for the judges and everyone who bought tasting tickets, Taylor said, taking the box from her father. Thankfully, the legs are provided for us as part of the entry fee. And you have total freedom on how to prepare them? I asked. Yes, Gabriel said. You'll have quite a variety tomorrow. Grilled frog legs, kung pao frog legs, Provençal frog legs, stuffed frog legs, frog leg gumbo, fried frog legs. Dad, Taylor interrupted. You're starting to sound like that guy from Forrest Gump. How do you prepare them? I asked, amused by Taylor. Firecracker frog legs. I hope you like spicy, Gabriel said, rubbing his hands together. Usually I do, although I'm worried my definition of spicy might be different from yours. Good luck, I said, and excused myself to catch up to Daniel, who was still with Kayla. I was surprised to see her wiping away tears. I glanced down, no onions in sight. Is everything okay? I asked. Stupid question, since obviously it wasn't. It's fine, Kayla answered. She went over to the hand-washing station, used a paper towel, and carefully dabbed at her face. I was just telling your brother about some problems I've been having. But it's fine. She gave Daniel a long look. After spending some time asking her about her preparation, we left her to her frog legs. What was that about? I asked Daniel the second we were away from her booth. She asked me not to tell you, Daniel answered, but being his sister, I could hear the reluctance in his voice. He wanted to spill. I bet I could get him to reveal it if I pushed hard enough. But out of respect for Kayla, I refrained. Plus, I suspected she had a similar story to Taylor's. Attention, all chefs. Henri bellowed from a few booths away. You have 2 hours left to prep before we close down for the evening. I felt the pace around me quicken at that announcement. People are getting excited now, Daniel commented. This is the most important time, really, as you prep for tomorrow and the possibility of a grand prize. I shook some sand out of my flip-flops. How much is the prize? $5,000. I was surprised by the high amount until Henri said they had a sponsor. Plus, if it's a restaurateur rather than an amateur, they'll get a special write-up in the New Orleans Gourmet Guide for Best Frog Legs. That's probably worth more than the prize. The next hour went quickly, as chefs raced to the finish, trying to get everything done and leave enough time to clean up. I was worried for a few contestants whose knife skills were slightly concerning. But, in the end, everyone seemed to have kept the same number of digits they came in with. The closest anyone came to serious injury was Henri. A half hour before close, I noticed a commotion and ran over to find Henri involved in a pushy-shovey match. Since his opponent reminded me of the Incredible Hulk, minus the green color, Henri was losing badly. Henri was attempting to escape from the booth, but the Hulk blocked his way and aggressively poked a finger into his chest. Andrea Gomez, one of the contestants, tried to insert herself between the two combatants. I jammed myself into the middle with her, pulling Henri as she dragged away the other man. I managed to steer Henri out of the booth while Andrea tried to calm down the Hulk. "Paul, stop it." She grabbed his arm to hold him back, It didn't work. The Hulk, Paul, followed us out into the aisles. "Stay away from my wife," he yelled. "I was only attempting to," Henri protested, pivoting around and stopping in place. "I know what you were trying to do," Paul interrupted, accenting his words with a slight shove. "Chef's clogs are both comfortable and slip-resistant in a kitchen. They aren't, however, the best footwear for a wrestling match." Henri stumbled backwards, fell out of his shoes, and hit the ground. I risked my life, got between Henri and Paul, and reached out a hand to help the fallen chef stand up. "Apologize now," I whispered. Henry's eyes flashed, but after a quick look at the Hulk, he cleared his throat. "My apologies for any misinterpretation of my intentions." When Paul still stood there with clenched fists, Andrea smacked his arm. "Paul," she growled. "Fine. But stay away from her." He stalked back to Andrea's booth. I quickly muscled Henri away from the scene. "I don't suggest hitting on our contestants, but if you do, perhaps you shouldn't pick one with a husband massive enough to snap you in two. I don't think we want broken chef's legs on the menu." Henri straightened his toque, which had gotten knocked askew in the struggle. "I wasn't hitting on her. I was discussing her knife techniques. It is not my fault that her behemoth of a husband disagreed with my method of demonstration. I thought I could help her, as you say, get a feel for it. I thought he was the one getting a feel for it, or at least trying." "Of course, chef." Richard stepped out from his booth. "Is everything okay?" Yes. Of course." Henri brushed at his jacket, then straightened it. When he leaned over to wipe at his black and white houndstooth pants, Richard raised an eyebrow at me over Henry's bent form. I shrugged. "Well, if you're okay, I've got some froggies to brine." Richard stepped back into his booth and stirred something in a stock pot resting on a metal counter. Curious, I followed him. "What's in the brine?" He tapped his finger to his nose. "Ancient family secret. Whatever he does to them, they are exquisite." Henry's accent always got thicker whenever he talked about the frog legs. "They are so succulent, so tender, so moist and delicious. Reminds me of the frog legs of my youth. I don't know how you do it. It's the magic of the brine and the pressure cooker." I peeked into the pot, which was filled with a brownish liquid. "Let me see if I can figure it out." I grabbed a spoon, dipped it in, and let the brine sit on my tongue a moment. Salt, obviously. Brown sugar? That might get you some nice caramelization. Are those pink peppercorns? Interesting choice. Richard nodded. I find it gives a floral note, which pairs well with the cream sauce I create. It adds some type of magic, Henri added. That I can't tell you. Richard poured the brine into a plastic bin, added in frog legs, closed the lid, and stored it all in a waist-high refrigerator. "Just need to clean up and I'm done." He placed the pot in a deep hotel pan already filled with dirty utensils and bowls. "Thanks for showing me your ancient secret recipe, chef," I said. "I look forward to trying it tomorrow." "May I help you take everything to the wash station, chef?" Henri asked, grabbing a cutting board. I'm sure that was a big help. I took my leave from the two men to wander some more. After speaking with several other contestants, I settled down at one of the many picnic tables under the dining tent. It was mostly empty today, but tomorrow it would be overrun with people who would pay to taste the cook-off entries. Pulling out my phone, I checked out the potential winning contestants Chef Henri had mentioned. Obviously, I was familiar with Brenda Sterling's Eatery, a farm-to-table restaurant with amazing reviews and mouth-watering entrees, including the frog legs picante I'd be trying tomorrow. Some of the reviews made me nervous, asserting how spicy the dish was. I could handle a certain level of heat, but I wasn't the biggest fan of kill you spice as it overpowers the other flavors in a dish. Checking out the information on the website's About page, I was impressed to see she had 2 more restaurants in the works, in addition to a recent expansion of sterling reputation. Chef Richard's site looked sleek and sharp, as did the photos of his restaurant Delicious. The description proclaimed that the restaurant combined the best of French and Southern cuisine, with a focus on environmentalism and sustainability. The seafood items on the menu definitely fit that theme. There was no red snapper or grouper, two fish that were at risk due to overfishing. Instead, he featured hogfish, mackerel, and a variety of preparations for lionfish, which I knew was an invasive species. His bio was impressive as well. Not just his cooking experience, but also his extracurricular activities. Notably, Richard had played running back during his college years at LSU. Kayla was the sous chef at Louisiana in the Lobby, a hotel restaurant near the Louis Armstrong International Airport. Even though people often sneer at them, I've had plenty of fine meals at hotel restaurants. The reviews were overwhelmingly positive, and an article about the restaurant mentioned Kayla specifically, saying she had been a saucier at the French Laundry. Impressive. I wasn't able to find anything about Chef Leonard, making me wonder if he was an amateur cook. There were some amateurs at this cook-off, so that was very possible. I hadn't yet met Chef Frederick. A few people had mentioned that he didn't bother showing up for prep day. I went to his restaurant's website next and was not impressed. Creole Kitchen was an uninspired and mundane name, and the menu seemed to match. His bio listed every job he'd held, proving that he didn't stay in one kitchen for very long. In addition to many other assignments, he had been sous chef for both Henri and Richard. Obviously, the food world in Louisiana was as incestuous as in California. I was already familiar with Chef Gabriel's restaurant from the Airplane magazine, where they talked about his juvenile delinquency and how he turned his life around when he discovered cooking. Still wanting to know more, I checked out Cafe Z's website and was further inspired by his story and his talent. Hopefully, I could be as strong as he was with my own recovery. And the menu was intriguing, with a number of creative combinations that sounded amazing. I added his place to my hit list for this week. Since I wanted to thank my brother for his support, we had arranged to stay in New Orleans for a few days after the contest, so I could show him the best Louisiana had to offer. Daniel found me in the tent. "Are you about finished here, Jackie?" he asked, whipping out a brochure. "It says there's going to be a frog parade at 7 on the boardwalk. We can't miss that." My brother loves oddities, so I knew he was sincere. I looked around and noticed most of the chefs were gone. I need food first, though. Anything but frog legs. Daniel and I grabbed an oyster po' boy and a shrimp étouffée from a nearby cafe. Then we joined the crowd to await the festivities. Like many parades, this one started with the local high school marching band. They weren't too bad. Shriners drove by in their little cars, little girls in frog costumes twirled batons, and firefighters threw candy from their vehicles to waiting children. The parade ended with a float featuring this year's frog princesses, a bored-looking teenager and a young girl dressed as a tadpole. Even the crowd was into the theme. I saw two teens dressed up as Prince Naveen and Princess Tiana from the Disney movie. Others wore frog hats, frog socks, and frog shirts. I hadn't seen this much green since last St. Patrick's Day. One older man in frog overalls came by with an accordion. The crowd cheered. As he started playing a familiar-sounding song, everyone gathered in large circles to dance. "It's the chicken dance," I said to Daniel. "Or at least a froggy version of it." "Come on," Daniel said, pulling me into a nearby circle. "Let's do it." "I'm not sure that I've ever danced sober," I said as I let myself get dragged. We caught on quickly. The moves were a little different from the chicken dance, starting out with bouncing, then some leaps, then the same twisting motion from the chicken dance, and then followed by frog hops. While fun, the hops and jumps and squats were terrifyingly reminiscent of the killer workouts my former trainer would put me through, earning him the nickname Salvador the Sadistic. If they started doing burpees in this frog dance, I was quitting. I had to admit it, Grenville Beach threw a good bash. After a spectacular sunset, we danced and partied into the night. "Okay, I think we've earned ourselves some beignet," I declared. "Hopefully, there's a place open this late." I tapped the shoulder of a woman who looked like a local in the know. 10 minutes later, at her recommendation, we were once again near the competitor area, sitting on the boardwalk and enjoying Louisiana's excellent version of donuts. "These are so good," I said. Crispy outside, pillowy inside. Just as good as Café du Monde. When we had flown into New Orleans, that iconic restaurant had been our first stop. Daniel stated his agreement around a mouthful of dough and powdered sugar. MMRRPH, so well said Daniel. Have you thought of a career as a food critic? I laughed, then stopped suddenly, spotting a person-shaped figure walking through the booth area. Who's that going into the competitor area? Daniel swallowed before answering this time. I'm not sure. Maybe a security guard. That makes sense. What with all that equipment? We watched as the dark figure walked confidently through the competitor's area, beaming a flashlight around. You're probably right. I popped the rest of my beignet in my mouth, enjoying that last sweet bite. It's late. Let's head to the hotel and get some sleep. As they say, the early bird catches the frog. Sadly, even though the beignet bakery was right next to the parking lot, I had to resist stopping in for another one the next morning. The green sheath dress I was wearing was already a little snug. There wasn't even a single beignet's worth of room. I did grab a café au lait, counting that against my burned calories from the frog dance. I was up bright and early, determined to make a good impression on Chef Henri. Only a few competitors were here already, but I was happy to see Brenda, although she didn't look happy at all. Hey girl, want me to grab you a coffee or something? I asked, since the other chef seemed to be busy moving around her booth. Coffee would be wonderful, but what I want more is my filleting knife. She bent over, checking under a table. It's missing? Yes, and I needed to prepare the frog legs. Manuel must have misplaced it during cleanup. She scowled at her sous chef. Manuel held up his hands, protesting his innocence. I'm sure I kept everything together when I went to wash up. Having faced Brenda's wrath as her sous chef before, I defended the poor guy. You know how easy it is to lose track of things when you're at these outdoor events. Everyone's vying for the same sink. Yeah, I know. But it's pissing me off. Is anything else missing? I asked, though everything else seemed in its place, as Brenda's kitchens always were. She was the poster child for mise en place. No wonder she was irritated at a missing knife. No, she frowned and grabbed a paring knife from her roll. This'll have to do. I've got to get started. Can you ask around, see if anyone has seen it? Sure. And I'll let Chef Henri know as well, so that he's aware. Brenda glanced up, clearly distracted. I haven't seen him yet, which is odd. He's usually first on site. Great. So now I was looking for a knife and a pompous chef. I checked in with everyone, which gave me the opportunity to talk to Gabriel and Taylor. I also made certain to greet Kayla, hoping she'd decide that I was just as trustworthy as my brother and spill the deets on Henri. No one had seen the knife or Henri. Making it to the end of the row, I came to a booth that was still closed. Whose booth is this? I asked the competitor next door, who I recognized as Andrea Gomez, Chef Henry's latest victim. The Hulk, a.k.a. Paul, was hunched on a stool in the booth, clearly on wife guard duty. From the scowl on his face, he didn't seem the forgive and forget kind of guy. Andrea didn't even look up from her chopping. It's supposed to be for Chef Frederick, who never deigns to show up until 9 a.m. He claims the pressure on him transfers to the frog and makes it more tender. She raised her head. Did you know there are some oddballs in our profession? That's definitely true. I flipped open the tent flap, stepped inside, and screamed. The good news was, I had found Brenda's knife and the missing Henri. The bad news, one was embedded in the other. Brenda's going to need a new knife. Probably not my best thought, but it's what came to mind, even as I realized I needed to call the police. I fumbled for my phone as Andrea and her husband came to see what all the screaming was about. The emergency operator picked up immediately. Kitchen accidents happened often, so this wasn't the first time I had called 911, but I still stuttered for a few seconds before speaking coherently. I'm at the Grenville Beach Frog Festival. In the cook-off area. I found a man who's been stabbed. Is the assailant in the area? Are you currently in danger? The voice on the other end of the call was calm and quiet, which reminded me to take a deep breath. I shook my head, then realized she couldn't see me over the phone. No. I think he's been dead for a while. Are you certain that he's dead? Oh, yeah. I'm not a doctor, but I'm fairly certain that a person can't bleed that much and survive. There are multiple knife wounds on his body. Henri would have been upset with the bloody stains on his white chef's coat, but that was probably not a big concern for him now. The knife is currently stuck in him, and his eyes are open, staring. Paul crouched down and touched Henry's arm. He's cold. I mean, not cold. More like room temperature. Well, not room temperature, but he cringed. At least I wasn't the only one saying stupid things. I repeated his information to the operator. I listened to her, then relayed her message to Paul and Andrea. She says we need to leave the area, not let anyone else into it. Protecting the crime scene, I realized as I exited the booth. And it was definitely a crime scene. I doubted that Chef Henri had plunged the knife into his own chest, and even if he had, I doubt he'd have been able to do so repeatedly. The lyrics from Cell Block Tango kept running through my head, about running into a knife. Running into a knife 10 times. I saw Brenda, Gabriel, and Taylor among the group that had gathered around the booth. Paul was holding everyone back, arms wide. No one was getting past the Hulk. I walked over to Brenda. What happened? Brenda's eyes were wide. It's Chef Henri. He's dead. Stabbed. I wondered if I should mention it was her knife, but decided that would be cruel. Instead, I just finished with, a lot. She squeezed her eyes shut. Please tell me that my knife was not involved. See? She had figured it out on her own anyway. I'd love to say it's not, but, oh hell. I've never had any trouble with the police in my life, but they're going to say I did it. Why would they think you did it? Then I realized she might be worried, not because of her knife being involved, but because of her skin color. You didn't have a reason to kill him, did you? She waved a hand toward the crowd. Who here doesn't have a reason to kill him? He is. She paused, took a breath. That is, he was a jerk. Abused his staff, abused his status. Sneered at anyone who didn't have a French culinary background. I hated him, but not enough to kill him. Still, I'm going to get blamed, I know it. Do you have an alibi? I asked. No, she cursed. Jimmy usually attends this with me, but he stayed home this year. Tia had her freshman orientation at Tulane, and we wanted one of us there with her. Jimmy was her husband, I knew. It was hard to believe that their daughter was already starting college. I saw Daniel pushing through the crowd and excused myself to get to him. Are you okay? He asked, grabbing my arms. They said someone was killed. He looked distressed, so I didn't point out that it obviously wasn't me. I'm okay. It's Chef Henri. I found him, and it looks like it was Brenda's knife that killed him. Daniel flicked his eyes toward my former boss. She didn't do it, Daniel. I worked with her for years. She has a temper, but not that bad. And she'd never kill in cold blood. I could hear the wail of sirens in the distance. Over Daniel's shoulder, I saw Kayla being comforted by Richard. They must have both just shown up. Neither had been around when I arrived. What about Kayla? Daniel took a step back. Kayla? Could she have done it? She was obviously upset yesterday. He bit his lip, a telltale sign. No. She has no reason to kill Chef Henri. Daniel, I can tell when you're lying. This isn't a time for secrets. A man is dead. And I'm worried for Brenda. I could see police rushing our way. Tell me quick. Henri promised her that if she came to his hotel room, he'd make sure she won the competition. She didn't want to do it, although she was tempted by the prize money. She's drowning in debt and doesn't get paid much, even though she does all the work at the hotel. Was she going to go? I asked, stepping back for the rushing ambulance crew. I wanted to tell them there was no reason to hurry. I don't know. Daniel furrowed his brow. I don't think so. I wish we could help her out. Me too, bro. In my flush pre-alcohol days, I had loved being able to assist others. But Kayla wasn't going to be winning the cook-off today. I strongly suspected it would be canceled. It hadn't been too bad talking to the police officers about what I'd seen. Usually, I'd rather cook a gourmet meal for 30 toddlers than talk to the authorities. But at least they hadn't brought out any thumbscrews. Yet. Now I was sitting in the same tent I'd been in the day before, when I was looking up all the information about the contestants. This time, however, I wasn't on my phone. The police hadn't taken our phones, but they had warned us that they could get a search warrant to review them, so anything we did now could be admissible in court. So I just sat there with nothing to do other than watch my fellow tent mates. The police had separated everyone, placing one person at each picnic table, so we couldn't even talk to each other. I suspect that was the point. Instead, I used my imagination. Who could have done it? One of the victims of Henry's sexual harassment? My eyes flitted from Kayla to Taylor to Andrea. Or, of course, it could be a protective male. Taylor's father gave her a job to shield her from Henry. Could he have taken things further? And, of course, I already knew that the Hulk was willing to resort to physical violence to defend his wife's honor. My eyes met another caring male, but I knew this one was innocent. The phrase, "he wouldn't hurt a fly," literally applied to my brother. He was the type that gently moved spiders and bugs outside rather than kill them. Daniel raised his eyebrows, then mouthed, "Are you okay?" I shrugged. As okay as one could be after finding a dead body and being interrogated. Brenda sat at the picnic table next to my brother. She looked terrified. Still, I was as convinced of her innocence as I was of my brother's. I had worked under her for 3 years, and while I'd seen her angry, I'd never seen her make any physical moves. No, she preferred eviscerating people with her words. I'd seen grown men brought to tears by her razor-sharp tongue-lashing. Even when she was met by violence, like the saucier who threw an entire pan of au jus at her, she had effortlessly evaded the scalding liquid, handed him a mop, and then promptly fired him after he cleaned it up. But now, she looked scared. When she glanced over at me, I copied Daniel's actions, silently asking if she was okay. She shook her head, held up her hand to demonstrate that it was shaking. Then she jerked upright when her name was called. I saw a brief look of panic. Then she closed her eyes and seemed to collect herself. "Heard," she called out. I smiled at her use of that common kitchen acknowledgement. We had all spoken to the police after they arrived, but then had to wait in the tent. Hours later, 2 plainclothes detectives had arrived, probably from the homicide department. I had hoped not to deal with their type again, I thought, remembering the crab festival I had judged. After about 30 minutes, it was my turn with the detectives. I wasn't as nervous as Brenda, but it was close. A uniformed officer led me to a booth away from the cooking areas, which originally was going to be used to check in the festival attendees and was now being used for interviews. "Hello, Ms. Norwood." The first detective, a dark-haired 40-something man wearing khakis and a blue polo shirt, welcomed me and waved toward a chair that had been set up across from a folding table. At the table was another plainclothes detective, this one blonde and wearing khakis and a brown shirt. "My name is Detective Rodriguez. This is my partner, Detective Paulson. We understand you found the body." I swallowed hard. "That is correct. Can you go over the circumstances that led to you finding the deceased?" Paulson asked. I didn't want to, but I recited what had happened from talking to Brenda, to looking for the knife, to finding the knife and the deceased. Detective Paulson shuffled through his notes. "This is Brenda Sterling? And you were looking for her knife when you found the body?" I nodded, then realized that he was focused on his notes. "Yes, and you thought it would be in an empty booth? I was just searching everywhere. Why would the knife have been there, since no one had used it?" "Detective Paulson, you would not believe what happens at these outdoor events. Things get lost all the time and turn up in the darndest places. Like I said, I was searching everywhere." "Had you met Miss Sterling before this event?" Hoping that Brenda had been truthful with the cops, I answered honestly. "Yes, I worked under her for 3 years as a sous chef." "When was this?" I racked my brain for a moment. About 5 years ago. And did you leave amicably? Or were you fired? I left to be the executive chef at my own restaurant. Plus, I had an opportunity for a television show. I was slightly perturbed that they didn't recognize me. I assumed they were not the biggest fans of the Gourmet Channel. Detective Paulson held up a hand. Wait, you're that Jackie Norwood? From the Gourmet Channel? Huh, maybe he was a fan. He rolled his eyes. My ex-wife loved cooking shows. That's all she watched, even though she never did any actual cooking herself. I think my favorite part of getting a divorce was that I don't have to watch that stupid channel anymore. Or not. On the bright side, this probably meant that he didn't know that I had lost my show. Detective Rodriguez spoke up. Wasn't your show canceled? He furrowed his brow. Something about you drinking? I sighed. Yes. 7 months ago. A little later I entered rehab and have been sober ever since. Next question. What was your relationship with Chef Henri? Paulson asked. We worked together on various food shows, judged a few episodes of Slice together. He knew I had, well, nothing else to do and thought my presence here might bring some additional guests. I glanced around. Sadly, the throngs of my fans never showed up. So, no personal relationship with him? I wrinkled my nose. Good Lord, no. He's old enough to be my father. Plus, I'm married. More of a technicality, since I was in the middle of a divorce, but I wasn't going to tell them. I thought I read that you were separated? Rodriguez said. Great. I ended up with the only food show watching/gossip mag reading cops in Louisiana. Yes, but that, like the show cancellation, is a recent development. Did you get along with the victim? Paulson asked. I paused, considering. He was a jerk, a lech. I'll take your silence as a no. Paulson scribbled on his notepad. Wait a second. I was thinking. I rushed to explain. I can't say I liked the victim. He was sexist, misogynist, probably a few otherist words. He'd hit on any young woman and insult any others who didn't fit his ideal. I wouldn't trust him with my kid sister. Not that I had one. But I didn't hate the man. That was way more than I had planned to say. I suspected that had been the detective's goal. Neither of them said anything after my outburst. The silence stretched. I didn't kill him or anything. More silence. Trust me. If I were to kill each annoying womanizer I came across, I could fill the Gulf of Mexico. I pointed to the water, then cursed silently. They'd done it again, got me to say stupid things. I met Rodriguez's gaze, trying to impress him with my direct eye contact. This time, when they let the silence continue, I let them. I started listing cooking techniques in my head. Basting, frying, sautéing, blanching. Sous vide, does one say sous viding? Boiling, braising, simmering. Rodriguez broke before I did. If you didn't kill him, do you know anyone who might have had a reason to do so? I thought of all the names and motives I had come up with in the tent. I was tempted to tell them what I knew about Kayla, but that was hearsay. Even if it put Brenda in the clear, I wasn't going to throw Kayla under the bus. Again, he was not a nice individual. I think I'd have a hard time coming up with someone who didn't have some motive. But I'm not sure who hated him. You'd have to hate someone to kill them like that, wouldn't you? Paulson snorted. You'd be surprised. People kill for some pretty minor things. The detectives walked me through the timeline again. That was time number 3 now. I wondered if they were trying to trip me up. Thank you, Ms. Norwood. We appreciate your cooperation. Hopefully, you'll be staying in Grenville for a few more days. I nodded. Yes, although I doubt the festival will continue. That's a lot of frog legs that are going to be thrown out. They've already started that, Detective Paulson said. We found what looked like an entire batch of frog legs thrown away in one of the trash cans. Any idea why a chef would have done that? It's possible they overcooked them, so they decided to start over. I frowned. Although it's rather early to have prepared them, since the tasting wasn't supposed to be until noon. I checked my watch and was shocked to see it wasn't even 11. Paulson shook his head. These weren't cooked. They were raw. I raised an eyebrow. That's odd. Do you still have them? We do, Detective Paulson said, with a nod toward Rodriguez, who left the booth. We also found it unusual, so we kept them just in case. What temperature were they when you found them? I asked, wondering if someone had tossed them after rethinking their preparation this morning. I'd say they reached the same temperature as the environment. Okay, so then they probably weren't thrown away this morning. Maybe last night. Where were they found? In a trash barrel near the southeast corner of this lot. When I just stared at him, Paulson turned and pointed. That section over there, where the officer is standing. I followed the direction of his finger. A policewoman was standing in the back, near Gabriel's booth. Rodriguez returned with an evidence bag full of frog legs. Looked like a full batch to me. May I asked. He handed me the bag. I turned it around in my hands, inspecting the meat inside. You're right, I said to Paulson. It does look like an entire batch of raw frog legs. Not sure why anyone would just throw away. I paused, recognizing the pink hue of the peppercorns stuck to the meat. Huh, these are Chef Richard's frog legs. There are pink peppercorns in here. Why would he throw them away? I shook my head. I don't know. More importantly, I was there when he poured the brine on the legs, and I saw him leave after storing everything in the fridge. And he didn't show up this morning until after the police arrived. Confused, I stared at the legs. Can we check his refrigerator? After I pointed out Richard's booth, Paulson let me accompany them to search the refrigerator. Inside, still barely fitting, was the brining bucket. Open it up. As they did, I could see the brine, with pink peppercorns floating on top. Let me fish out a frog leg, although fish might not be the right word there. I grabbed a slotted spoon from Richard's utensils and amphibianed up 2 legs. This one is still full of legs. I inspected the froggy appendage. These might be bigger than the legs I saw him brine yesterday. I mean, brining often plumps up meat, but he must have switched out the frog legs, but when? He couldn't have done it yesterday evening or this morning, so it had to have been last night. I glanced over at the dining tent and caught Richard watching me. When our eyes met, he bolted to his feet and sprinted toward the exit. Grab him, I yelled. The policeman guarding the tent tried to intercept Richard, but he demonstrated his collegiate running back abilities and sidestepped to the left, evading the tackle. He juked to the right to avoid another police officer, slipped out of a horse collar tackle from Gabriel, who grabbed at his shirt, and leapt over a picnic table. I thought he was gone, until my brother, who had never played football, stuck out a leg and tripped him. Richard ended up face first, sliding hard, before being tackled by several police officers. Nice move, Paulson said. Yeah, but that would have earned him a 15-yard penalty on the football field for unsportsmanlike conduct, I said, beaming at my clever brother. Richard killed Henri because of the frog legs? Brenda asked, as we sat in the tent the next day chowing down. The cook-off had been canceled, but rather than waste the product, all of the chefs, minus Richard, of course, had prepared their dishes anyway. While the majority of the food had gone to a local homeless shelter, the cook-off competitors had saved enough for themselves to enjoy. I had just taken a bite of Brenda's super spicy frog legs picante, so I grabbed some water, the only thing close by. Yes, I said before taking a deep swallow, wishing for milk. Richard eventually spilled the beans. According to Detective Paulson, Richard was bringing in his own frog legs, rather than those supplied by the contest. And these frog legs were from France, which, of course, Henri preferred, Andrea guessed. She and Paul were sitting across from me. I was happy to finally see him relaxed, acting more like Bruce Banner than the Hulk. He did. And evidently, Henri realized it and accused Richard at the end of the prep day, giving Richard the idea to grab Brenda's knife during the chaos of cleanup. Richard offered him money if he didn't tell anyone, and suggested that they meet in Frederick's empty booth at midnight and he'd pay him. Oh, that explains it, Kayla said, then blushed. Explains what? I asked as I reached for the salt and pepper frog legs. I went to Chef Henry's room that night, Not to do what he wanted, she added quickly, but to tell him that I was going to tell the contest officials and the local press about his offer to award me first place. But he wasn't there. I'm sorry, Jackie. My brother jumped into the conversation, probably to take the attention away from Kayla. But you're telling me Chef Richard killed someone because he was using the wrong kind of frog legs? Well, yes. First of all, he's been winning the prize money from the Cajun Catch Company these past years, so they would probably have demanded back the money. And it was a pretty big chunk of change. But more importantly, it would have ruined his reputation if it got out. Not just because he was cheating, but because Mr. Sustainable Food was using smuggled-in French frog legs. It's been illegal to commercially farm or hunt frog legs in France for decades. In fact, frog poachers get a really hefty fine and a year in jail if caught. Taylor, sitting next to her father, was engrossed. How did he get the illegal frogs into the festival? Weren't there guards? I nodded. Evidently, Richard has been bribing them for years, so that he could go in and replace the normal frog legs with his ill-gotten ones. The guards just conveniently took a break at an arranged time. In fact, according to Detective Paulson, it was the guards' confession that finally got Richard to spill everything. When they realized they might be charged with aiding and abetting a murderer, they admitted to this arrangement. I'm surprised Detective Paulson told you all this, Andrea said. I rolled my eyes. Yeah, I suspect that he had an ulterior motive to tell me. That was confirmed when he offered to take me out to dinner and tell me more. But he was, at least, gracious when I told him no. I had sworn off men during my recovery. Well, I'm grateful that we mostly know what happened, Gabriel said, spooning some of his firecracker frog legs onto my plate. Here, try these. I took a bite and immediately reached for my water glass. It was empty. I'll get you a drink, Daniel offered. Not enjoying the beach this time though, right? No, I croaked. Although I suppose I'd prefer enjoy the beach to this trip's murder on the beach.